So another off-season program as we take a look at the Denver Broncos on today's show. And for the first time, Andrew Mason is going to join us. He covers the Denver Broncos. He's a writer and podcaster at the DNVR.com. We'll find out more about that. He's also the co-host of the Afternoon Drive on Mile High Sports. You can find him on Twitter at Mace Denver. Andrew, thanks for taking your time to talk Denver Broncos football with us today.
My pleasure. That is a phenomenal introduction. I'm already excited.
All right. Awesome. I'm glad I got it right. It's a long one.
Yeah.
So tell me about DNVR.com, Andrew.
Okay, DNVR.com. We're a sports media website in Denver. We're subscription based. Kind of our focus is obviously on providing coverage of all the Denver sports teams. We've got beat journalists on the Denver Nuggets, the Colorado Rockies, the Colorado Avalanche, University of Colorado, and Colorado State. But also we're kind of focused on things that make a better fan experience. So a 5 days a week podcast is a signature part of it. We've also got written content. I'm working on a series right now on what I would call the second tier quarterback possibilities. So going through the guys like Tyrod Taylor and Sam Darnold and Gardner Minshew, who could be on the Broncos' radar if they want to provide competition for Drew Lock. So we've got written content, we got the podcast. We even have a restaurant. Literally, if you ever visit Denver and you just check out the DNVR bar, we sell T-shirts that go with all the local teams as well. Awesome. And sweatshirts and all that. So we're pretty busy. It's kind of a new model, but we're doing pretty well with it, and it's come a long way in the last few years. So it's really exciting to kind of be somewhere that's really kind of it's kind of on the cutting edge of media, kind of doing things differently than traditional media. It's really exciting to be a part of.
Glad to hear. Matter of fact, I mean, I'd love to move. I've talked about, I went from New Jersey to South Florida. I was there for way too long. The heat, I just couldn't take it anymore. I'm now in Western Carolina, and I like it so much, but it's like, you know what? I want a little bit more, and I'm thinking about going out west. And the first stop, anytime you're thinking about going out west, is Colorado.
Yeah, and of course, you're there up in the mountains in Western North Carolina, out there in the Blue Ridge, and not that it isn't beautiful. I've spent a lot of time out there. I've taken many a lovely hike up in the mountains around Asheville in particular, but the mountains in Colorado are just a little bit higher profile. We got all the 14ers all over the place. I actually was just down in the shadow of Pikes Peak a couple of days ago. So it's incredibly picturesque, but you're in a pretty beautiful spot as well.
All right, so Denver fan, and yet I could see an old school Tampa Bay Bucks helmet. You're wearing an Atlanta Brave sweatshirt. What's the deal with that?
All right, well, I grew up a Braves fan. Actually, I'm originally from Richmond, Virginia, where the Braves had their AAA team for 42 years, or a little bit under that. And so you'd see the players in Richmond, then they got promoted to Atlanta. You'd watch them on TBS back in the day.
Those were the TBS days, right?
Oh yes. But wherever I've gone, I've been a huge Braves fan. And then the Bucks helmet. I lived in the Tampa Bay area when I was in middle and high school, and in college as well. Okay. And so I grew up going to the Bucks games back in the creamsicle days, the bad old days. Fortunately, just in time when I was in college at the University of South Florida, Tony Dungy showed up and got things turned around. So I got to experience some success as a fan before I went on my professional journey in pro football.
So are they your favorite team?
As a fan, yes. Even though I'm not a big Tom Brady fan, but
that's kind of tough.
It was a lot of fun. And as I often would say around here, I'm like, okay, it's good with Tom Brady, but I really love the fact that guys like Levante David and even though he was injured, O.J. Howard, and you just go on down the list of guys, on that Bucks roster that had been, Mike Evans has been there since 2014, and he's as good as you'll find. The guys that have been there for all the bleeding and got to experience that success, I mean, that's tremendous. The one guy I wish that was still there that had gotten to be a part of that Super Bowl team was the guy I covered this past year in Denver, DeMar Dotson. Of course, they let him go last year, and the Broncos signed him to play right tackle. He's a really good dude, but
bad timing.
I feel bad for him because
10 years with Tampa Bay.
Yeah, but at the same time, I can't blame. Yeah, at the same time though, the Bucks got Tristan Wirfs, and
Yeah,
with all respect to DeMar, Tristan's going to be an All Pro
sure.
pretty quickly
Yeah.
here. So
Sometimes it works out that way.
yeah,
Sort of like when the Jets traded what's his name, the defensive tackle, to the Bucks in the midseason. And that was a really nice. It was a nice gesture by the Jets to do that, to give him an opportunity to try to win a Super Bowl, and he went ahead and won a Super Bowl. And so it just tells you could be with a team for a long time, and it's just and then another guy just throws in there for a couple of months, and he's a champion. But that's sports.
Yeah.
What are you going to do about it? Speaking of the quarterback position, let's go right at the top with Drew Lock, because outside the organization, there's a lot of people who seem to believe that, oh yeah, Drew Lock, he's not going to be the quarterback there. The Broncos are going to try to find someone better than Drew Lock. That's usually what they've done under John Elway, even though now John Elway is no longer running the personnel decisions. George Patton is. So is that a difference? Is that going to be the difference? Or do you think Drew Lock, when it's all said and done, will be the starting quarterback for the Broncos in 2021?
Well, if I were betting on a possibility among all the possibilities, it would be that Drew Lock is the Week 1 starting quarterback for the Broncos. Now, that being said, you can't close the door on anything. And of course, George Paton coming in for John Elway certainly shuffles the deck a little bit. And when Paton was hired, and actually specifically when John Elway stepped away a week before Paton got the job, the general thought was that Drew Lock lost his biggest defender in that building. Now, Elway is still the president of football operations. He's still on the competition committee. It's a role he's had for the last few years. But the day-to-day final say on football right now belongs to George Paton, the new GM. Now, Paton had some measured praise of Drew Lock last week. He did talk about the fact that he's in the building, that he's putting in the work. But both Paton and Vic Fangio talked about how they're going to bring in competition. They want to make the room as good as possible. Of course, the other thing is you have to judge by the actions. And the Broncos were in on Matthew Stafford. They were in the discussions. They didn't have the highest offer like the Rams proved to, but they were in and they were interested in Matthew Stafford. And certainly if the Texans get over their stubbornness and do put Deshaun Watson on the market, the Broncos are going to certainly be in on him as well. So I think they're at a point where if they can't get a Watson, and if a quarterback doesn't fall in their lap at number 9, they're comfortable going with Drew Lock and then adding someone else to that room to at least push and compete with him for this year. But they're kind of keeping their options open. And that's why I'd say if you're betting on an option, Drew Lock is the favorite, but I wouldn't say it's an overwhelming favorite. It's not like I'd say he's got an 80% chance of being the starter. I'd still put it less than that because of the other possibilities that are still in play.
Yeah, because 9, that's a kind of tricky position.
Right.
You kind of get the feeling that we know the top 3 after Lawrence will more than likely be gone by then. That's what I would guess. And you know how it is. Carolina is so desperate themselves for a quarterback. And you got other teams as well in the mix that are outside the top 10 trying to get in. So I think you're probably right. Statistically speaking, it would make because unless Denver just makes an offer, or when Watson, good luck. Watson has to be player ready. He just has to be. I just cannot believe that Caserio is just. Nah, we're not going to trade
Me
him.
either.
I mean, come on. Especially with the Jets and the Dolphins, with all of their draft ammo, and to compete against each other, I just think it's going to be really tough for any other team outside of the Jets and Miami to actually give Houston an offer that's any better. So it would take Denver a really lot to sway a move that would be better than the Jets or the Dolphins. Now, it could happen. But it would take a lot. Do you think that Denver, realistically, do you think that they would give up 2 to 3 first rounders or 2 first rounders and a premium player or 2? Do you feel that's possible?
I think it's possible, but I also think that the longer this goes on, the more the Broncos' chances increase of getting into the chat for a couple of reasons. Number one, if this ends up being protracted beyond this year's draft and even in this season, well, then that messes the Dolphins up unless they can accumulate some more future draft capital, and they may be a little further down the road with Tua Tagovailoa. The other thing for the Broncos is George Paton has talked about being in kind of asset accumulation mode. The Vikings were a team that liked to trade down. He has talked about how he wants to have a lot of picks and a lot of possibilities. So you look at this year, and it's an intriguing draft, no doubt, but it's also, compared to every other draft, it's a lower information draft because of how the pandemic has affected everything. So they're sitting there at 9. Let's say, like you said, 4 quarterbacks have gone off the board. And then you may have some teams that are picking in the teens to 20s that get a little bit frisky about saying, okay, well, if Mac Jones is still there, we better make sure we try to get him right now. And this is where the Broncos, kind of being a little coy, might help them out, because they could give the impression, hey, they might take a quarterback, because there are all sorts of possibilities. But if they could trade down for a team that's looking for a quarterback and get, say, a future one in 2022 out of the deal, then all of a sudden the Broncos have some extra capital to work with if the Deshaun Watson thing goes on.
Yeah,
makes sense. If they don't, and then if they don't get Deshaun Watson, the other thing that kind of comes on the other side is, all right, let's say they've done some trade downs and they've picked up a 1 and they've picked up a 2 in the 2022 draft. If they pull that off and they can't get Watson, but they give Drew Lock this year and he is okay, maybe a bit better than he was last year, but you get the sense that he's not a long-term answer, then you have enough capital to where even if you finish like 9-7 or so, you can start packaging picks to move up next year. And then if you like, say, Sam Howell, if he turned, and personally, I'm a big Sam Howell fan myself. I love what I've seen out of him so far. But if that's a guy that they want to target, they would have the draft capital to do it without blowing up multiple years of draft picks. So that's why I think when I step back, I think the Broncos are best served by trading down. And then you may not be able to get a Caleb Farley or Patrick Surtain by trading down, but you might get a J.C. Horn or Greg Newsome at the end of the first round. Of course, Newsome had that 4.31 40 at his pro day, so he's going to get on some radars.
What is it about Luck? What happened between rookie year, second year? Because so many things, so many different variables can always take place when you're talking about a rookie quarterback who actually, I mean, and it's kind of strange that his rookie numbers were better than his second year numbers. So that's why I ask, was it just the change in philosophy? Was it, we have more film on the kid? Was it the offensive line? What happened where it looked so promising in just 5 starts as a rookie that he just seemed a little bit more out of control, out of sorts this past season?
Well, I think it starts with the scheme change and the coordinator change. Rich Scangarello, dismissed after the 2019 season, did a really good job of giving Drew Lock, when he was in there for his first starts, stuff that he could work with. It was a lot of rollouts, and you get him outside, and you've kind of narrowed the field a little bit, but you've also got the field of vision for Drew Lock when he's rolled out to the right, to where it's something that he can kind of handle and get through his progressions quickly and make things happen. When some of Drew Lock's struggles early through midseason of 2020 were just kind of straight drop and having to see the whole field and having to kind of get to the second and third read and see the field from sideline to sideline. And that's where he ran into some trouble. Pat Shurmur, starting with the Miami game last November, really kind of started to focus more on kind of things that worked for Drew Lock under Rich Scangarello. Got him outside of the pocket, got him executing that play fake rollout that has worked so well for the Broncos over decades, really, and it seemed to really help Drew settle down. Now, that being said, it wasn't perfect. I mean, there are plenty of throws he'd like to have back. That Buffalo game in particular in Week 15, he had, I believe, 3 dropped interceptions in that game. That could have been a disaster for Drew Lock. But in general, he looked more settled, looked more comfortable. And so the Broncos' hopes for Drew Lock in 2021 are building off of the way he closed the season. He wasn't great, but he at least got to where in those last several weeks. You were talking about him playing at a league average level for a starting quarterback, with one really spectacular game spiking it in Carolina, and saying, okay, can we build off that? Can we build to something more? So that being said, the thing that I think will help him out is if the NFL can find a way to get the teams in person for any kind of off-season work, and that's not something that appears imminent. So that might put him again behind a little bit if he doesn't have the chance to get in the building with the rest of his teammates and have OTAs, and that's going to depend on just how fast everyone gets the vaccine.
All right, let's talk about the running back position because once again, from the outside, you see Philip Lindsay, and it was a nice story. He had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, and all right, they go out and get Melvin Gordon. Okay, well, more talented running back. He's got a great history, but okay, that's really good depth. Can't argue with it. Gordon had a okay season. I mean, for his standards, I'm sure he would like to have been a little bit better, but it was all right. Lindsay, though, his production dropped in half, and it just didn't seem like it was the same Philip Lindsay. Was that just because he didn't get enough touches? It was hard for him to get within the flow of the offense. He's a restricted free agent. I'm assuming he's going to be back. It's still a good room when you add in Royce Freeman. So are we going to see the same three guys next season?
Well, it depends on the level of the tender the Broncos give Philip Lindsay. If they give him a second-round tender, then I think he's back. But if they decide to go for the right of first refusal level tender, which is, I believe, like $1.3 million below the second-round tender, then I think someone's going to pluck Philip Lindsay, and he's going to be moving on. It's interesting because Lindsay dealt with an injury, missed some time last year. But it seemed like he never really got into the flow of things with Pat Shurmur, and that as time went on, Shurmur tended to lean on Melvin Gordon a little bit more. I know they wanted to get Philip Lindsay more involved in the passing game than he was. Lindsay had some drops, something that was a problem in 2019. The other thing that comes up with Philip Lindsay is that he's a willing blocker, but at his size, at sub 200 pounds, a smaller back, you see him get in there and he'll put his body in there and he'll try. I mean, it's not like he has any fear. That's the thing I love about Phil, frankly, is he's one of the most fearless backs in terms of taking on a rusher or going headlong into a stacked box. He's one of the most fearless backs I've ever seen, despite his size, but that size does offer limitations on what he can do as a blocker. And that bore itself out, and Pat Shurmur wants his running back to be able to have some responsibilities in pass pro. That's something that Royce Freeman can do reasonably well. It's something Melvin Gordon can do well enough, and so that's where you start saying, okay, is it just a case where there's not really room in this scheme for Philip Lindsay? That's, I think, what we're going to find out here, based on what the RFA tender is. Now, Gordon has a DUI trial coming up, and if he's convicted, he faces a multi-game suspension, and that, to me, would be reason to give Phil that second-round tender, knowing that you were covered at running back no matter what. But we'll find out what the Broncos do. That George Paton said that when he met the media, said that decision on the level of tender had not been made.
What was the fan reaction when the team signed Gordon? Not only does he come from a division rival, but Lindsay was a fan favorite. So what was the reaction? It didn't, again, from the outside, it didn't seem like the reaction was all that great.
Yeah, and it was definitely lukewarm. There were some that were excited because the thing that Melvin Gordon does very well is he's able to flourish in the red zone. And the Broncos, in the years before Melvin Gordon arrived, had very low efficiency rates in terms of generating first downs and touchdowns per touch for their running backs in the red zone. And Gordon delivered on that. He led the Broncos in touchdowns last year. The only negative on him was 4 fumbles, all of which were lost, and it seemed like they tend to come at the worst possible times. And Phil Lindsay, the thing he doesn't do is fumble, and that he's never fumbled as a pro. Wow. And so, a lot of Bronco fans took note of the fact that Melvin's putting the ball on the ground and that Phil is Mr. Secure Hands. But it was definitely lukewarm. There was some excitement in some circles, but Philip Lindsay, he's a local hero. He went to Denver South High School, then went on to the University of Colorado. And the interesting thing is, while he's done well with the Broncos, you always sense that there's a little bit of a reluctant embrace in some ways. Like, for example, in 2018, they signed him as an undrafted free agent. But if they really wanted him, above all, if they wanted to make sure they got him, they would have picked him in the 7th round. They picked another running back in round 7
That's a
that
good
year,
point.
Dave Williams out of
Yeah.
Arkansas. And I'm not sure that Phil is even a Bronco if if you don't have kind of the pull of the hometown team. But the hometown team decided, okay, we want to make sure we have Dave Williams, and we'll take our chances on getting Philip Lindsay in the market. And so that it's kind of interesting to look back at that. And then the other thing is just the way he was used last year, not optimally at times. For Phil's sake, sometimes I wonder what, say, a Brian Daboll would do with Philip Lindsay. And I think is something that kind of comes up. And I think if the Broncos do give that or the original round tender, which of course for him is undrafted, means no compensation coming back if he leaves. If they give him that tender, I think you're going to have some teams that really
Absolutely.
make a push for Philip Lindsay, because they'll say, you've been used this way, we're going to use you in that way, and this might be better for him.
Yeah, it appears to be one of those situations where the Broncos never have really appreciated what he's done for the
Yeah.
team, and it was almost like, okay, it's nice that he's a pleasant surprise, he's doing great for us, but he's only going to be here until we find someone else that's better.
Yeah, it's like the fact that he worked out was sort of the bonus, and they kind of try to figure out on the fly what to do with him, because of course in the draft class that he was in, even though he wasn't drafted, it was not only Dave Williams, but they also picked Royce Freeman that year as well. And then they bring in Melvin Gordon after Phil posts back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. Yep. And so you can see why Phil might be a little bit frustrated. Like, hey, I'm productive. What do I got to do here?
Be interesting to see what happens. Tight end Noah Fant broke out last season. Everybody knew he had it in him as one of the talented tight ends in college a few years ago. It's interesting because the Broncos have picked up a lot of talented tight ends in college over the last several years. Even Fumagalli and Butt are restricted free agents this year. Albert O only played 4 games last year, of course, played with Drew Lock at Missouri. But with Noah Fant, I mean, it's a luxury that not many teams have.
Yeah, and Fant had that season last year playing much of it on a bad ankle, and he persisted. And a couple of things happened. Number one, he improved as an inline blocker. He's never going to be a devastating blocker, but he is a willing blocker. And that kind of goes back to when he was at Iowa. If you don't block as a tight end, you don't get on the field at Iowa. Even though they had T.J. Hawkinson there at the same time, you've got to learn that phase of the game. And so he's never going to be devastating in that regard, but he's willing. Kind of reminds me a little of Shannon Sharp back in the day. Shannon Sharp was a terrific pass catcher, as we all know here. But when he was asked to block, he would block. It's not like, Julius Thomas, when he flourished, he kind of was a little bit reluctant to block, but you don't get that from Noah Fant. That being said, you got to know what he does best. There was a moment in his rookie season they had him one-on-one on the edge against Khalil Mack when they played the Bears. No, that is not how you use Noah Fant. If you're going to try to counter a pass rusher like Khalil Mack with Noah Fant, you quickly send Fant off into the flat and make him kind of the hot read for Joe Flacco, the quarterback at the time, and let him dump it off and take some of the edge off that pass rush. But yeah, Fant's coming along really well. And you mentioned Albert Okwuegbunam. He had 11 catches in the 4 games that he played, had a touchdown as well in that span. And he's a terrific pass catcher as well, like Noah Fant, but he is not anywhere near Noah Fant as a blocker. I remember watching him in training camp last year, and it's like, boy, he's got a ways to go. But Mizzou didn't really ask him to block, so he's basically starting from zero on that. So if he can get a little bit better at that once he gets back from the injury, certainly the pass catching tools are all there. Frankly, I think the Broncos would be wise to get the 2 of them on the field as much as possible once Albert O gets healthy, because I think they can cause some real problems with the 2 of them in terms of mismatches.
Sure.
It's hard enough to cover Fant. With Fant, I don't know if you recall this specifically, but in week 2, he goes against Devin Bush when the Broncos play the Steelers, and he shreds him. Fant won that game, won that battle, and it was interesting to look back on that because I think the Broncos, if they'd stood pat at 10 in 2019, would have taken Devin Bush. And instead they trade down, they picked Noah Fant. The first time they went head-to-head, Fant got the better of Devin Bush. And so when he's healthy and when things are going well for him, he's very tough to cover. You put Albert Okwebunam out there. I think the Broncos could see a scenario in a couple of years where the Broncos are saying maybe 2 tight ends is going to be our base formation.
And the receiving unit, which was really barren heading into the last offseason, then drafting Jerry Jeudy, drafting Hamler. Unfortunately, Sutton goes down in his first action of the season against the Steelers, and he's gone. But with Sutton back, Jeudy, Hamler, and then Tim Patrick came from nowhere to have himself a breakthrough season. You throw in Fant, and this is all of a sudden becoming a very interesting young receiving core.
Yeah, it can be pick your poison if it ends up working out well for opposing defenses. I don't know how you stop everybody. Now, that being said, there's some work to do. Like Jerry Jeudy had a drop problem, especially in that Charger game in Week 16 last year. But then he had a nice rebound. Had the Broncos' longest pass play in, I believe, over a decade in Week 17 when they played against the Raiders. So Judy's clearly got potential. KJ Hamler's someone who actually had some drop issues at Penn State, and they persisted in the NFL. But that's going to be kind of the equation with him. He's absolute burner on the field, as we all know, but he's going to put some balls on the ground. Tim Patrick was the real surprise of that. And we talk about drops with Jeudy and with Hamler. Tim Patrick did not drop a pass last year. Mr. Reliable. And Cortland Sutton comes back. Jerry Jeudy, you expect a leap in year 2. I'd be shocked if he's not a 1,000-yard receiver this year. And KJ Hamler, certainly, look at that Panther game that he played back in December and his ability to get open there. There's a lot of talent there. It's possible that the Broncos could be looking at a situation where Tim Patrick, as well as he played with all these other targets, does he become expendable? Now, he's a restricted free agent. If you give him a second-round tender, I think there wouldn't be a lot of interest in him. But I think they should give him the second-round tender, even if he does get shuffled down the depth chart a little bit with all this young receiving talent. A, it's insurance in case Cortland Sutton isn't all the way back from the torn ACL. B, if Tim Patrick goes out there, let's say he has 35 or 40 catches this coming year, it only has 1 drop, continues to be a reliable target, then someone's going to sign him in the next offseason, even if the Broncos don't.
Yeah.
And obviously they would get something back in terms of the compensatory haul. So I think for a lot of reasons, it'd be wise to bring Tim Patrick back, even though it's going to be a battle royale for playing time and for catches in that room because of the talent.
Yeah, I mean, because when you look at it, it's interesting. All of these guys have pretty high averages. So that's what you want. But Patrick's the only one that has a really good catch percentage, was what you were talking about. I mean, Judy's was under 50%, which is really bad. But even Hamilton and Hamler were around 50%. So it's like almost like a lot of boom and bust there. Like drops, like you said, inconsistencies. But these are young receivers, and you're going to have that. And I guess that as long as you see improvement, which you would hope that you're going to get, that there is an opportunity for something special here. Does Patrick have a ceiling? Has he reached his ceiling?
That's a really good question about Patrick. I think there's a little more that he can get to. I think he can be a bit more of a downfield threat. But this is, to me, he's not somebody you're going to talk about as a wide receiver 1, and that's fine. Sure. But I think as a wide receiver 2, he's ideal. And, sometimes on our DMVR Broncos podcast, we kind of joke about this because for some reason we talk. Aaron Rodgers is somebody we talk about a lot because we have a little friendly debate among us on just how good Aaron Rodgers is. But I sometimes look at Tim Patrick and think it's nice that he's a Bronco, but boy, oh boy, wouldn't he just absolutely be a monster in Green Bay?
Interesting. And Green Bay could sure use one. That's for sure.
Yeah, they could. Yeah, that would, if I'm marrying player and team for an ideal fit, a lot
What
of
do you
times
think
I
Denver
think
would want in
Tim
return?
Patrick and Green Bay.
What do you think they'd
What?
want in return?
I think if you could get more than you would get back in a compensatory haul a year from now, you'd be thinking that was good value. I think maybe a third round
Okay.
pick.
All right.
Would be fair.
And by the way, Sutton expected to be okay week 1.
Oh yeah, he's. I mean, I don't want to put too much on the brief glimpses we've got in terms of the workout videos and been put out there, but he looks good by all accounts. He's on schedule. He's running. He's probably going to start doing some more cutting here in a little bit. So I expect Sutton to be 100% now. As you know, sometimes that first year back from a torn ACL, they're not 100% back. But I think Cortland's going to be enough to be a plus player in 2021.
Okay, on defense. Before we get to defense, offensive line, the rookie center seemed to struggle, which is going to happen. But he's the future still, right, at center?
He is. And in fact, Vic Fangio, right after the season, when I asked him who I thought most improved players were on the team over the course of the year, he pointed to Lloyd Cushenberry at center. And certainly he settled down. I think it was just a really bad situation where you had a young quarterback and a young center. I think back to the Broncos in 2015. They had a first-year center in Matt Paradis. He was on the practice squad the year before, but he had Peyton Manning behind him. That helped things out. It's almost like if there's a lesson, everyone learns lessons from this, and if there's a lesson that I learned in terms of my own evaluation, it's okay in my kind of in my projecting players to teams and so forth. Don't have a rookie center with a rookie quarterback or young quarterback. Make sure that quarterback is established. But he did get better at identifying things pre-snap, identifying where the blitzes were coming from, and that helped Drew Lock along as well. So I think Cushenberry will do fine.
All right, and then Bowles had a breakout season.
Yes, he did.
He was
and he got a big contract too.
Okay.
Yeah.
And at right tackle, that's the question on the offensive line, correct?
The big question now. They're expecting Jawan James back. Of course, he opted out because of COVID, but he had knee problems in 2019, only played in 3 games, and got some criticism. There were people in that building that thought that Jawan James was not pushing hard enough, that he could have been out there, and he wasn't. James, of course, disagreed. He very much a kind of a he said kind of thing, with Broncos saying one thing and Jawan James saying another.
Because he's got a big contract, right?
He's huge contract. Like if the Broncos cut him today, his cap figure would go from $13 million to $19 million. So they're kind of stuck. They don't get to a point where they create more of a cap problem in 2021 if they cut him until June 1. And so even then you have $13 million and all of it would be dead money. So it's if they let him go. Now, I think in the ideal world, the Broncos would potentially trade Jawan James, but I don't know what that market would be. They are saying that they're going to welcome him back. James has expressed to the team that he is going to come back for this year, but he's going to have to rebuild some trust in that locker room with his team, with some of his teammates who frankly felt like he could have pushed more to be out there in 2019. It's not about the COVID opt-out last year. It's all about that has nothing to do with how they feel about him. It's all about 2019, and he was going to, even in a normal 2020, he was going to have to rebuild some trust in that locker room. That being said, Jawan James, he's kind of an every other season player, right? Every other season he's dealing with injuries, but then in the other years he's terrific. So maybe the Broncos get that out of him, and if they can, great. But that contract right now doesn't give the Broncos a lot of options at right tackle, a lot of good ones at least.
Yeah, speaking of contracts, the Broncos are in decent shape. They're a top 10 team cap-wise, so that's good.
Yes.
But what I notice is 2022, because in 2022, I see Von Miller, Simmons was tagged again, Jackson, Gordon, Chubb, Callahan, Sutton, Jewell. That's a lot of talent that will be, as of today, open to free agency next year. So what happens now is probably not just going to be this year's free agent crop, but also they're going to be looking about how can we take care of these guys before we get into next offseason.
Correct. And like you mentioned, Alexander Johnson, Josie Jewell. Johnson's a restricted free agent. I think they're going to give him a second round tender. I feel more secure that they're going to give him a round 2 tender than the other two big RFAs, Tim Patrick and Philip Lindsay. I think Johnson is a near certain bet, and they might be wise to work on a long term deal with him. Now, the key with Alexander Johnson is that he's kind of a plays with his hair on fire kind of guy. So he's best partnered with a more cerebral linebacker. I thought in 2019, Todd Davis brought out the best in Alexander Johnson, and in 2020, he and Josie Jewell worked very well together.
Okay.
Now, do they keep that tandem together, or do they move in another direction? Because Jewell, he's good inside the box, struggles in coverage. Do they want to improve in coverage? They've got a guy they picked in the 5th round last year, Justin Stronati out of Wake Forest, whose specialty is coverage. It's what he did very well at Wake. He got injured in training camp, and that kind of messed up their plans a little bit. They were scrambling in terms of coverage linebacker. Stronati is back to full health and should be good to go for this year. How much does he fit in as a sub-package guy, and can he develop into an every down guy? And if he does well, does that give the Broncos the freedom to move on from Johnson or Jewell? So there's that. Chubb, I'd be shocked if he doesn't get the 5th-year option. I think we're going to find that out here in the next couple of months, but every indication is that he will. Vaughn's interesting because the Broncos, as at the time we're recording this, the Broncos have to make a decision on Von Miller's option and whether to pick him up for 2021. If they can't get a restructure, I don't think because they don't want him back at $22+ million for 21. So if he's back, I think it's on some kind of restructure that at least kind of spreads the hit out a little bit and maybe adds a year. But it's possible that he's not back, and all of a sudden they're facing a vacancy there. Malik Reed last year playing for Von Miller at 8 sacks, but he's not Von Miller in terms of talent. Yeah. But could Malik Reed have a similar trajectory to, say, Shaq Barrett, who the Broncos had as an undrafted guy they brought in who eventually flourished? Of course, he ended up doing bigger things in Tampa Bay, showed some flashes in Denver. Malik Reed got more playing time than Shaq Barrett did, and Malik Reed took advantage of it. So, do they have faith in him? And so there are so many questions here. And you mentioned Kareem Jackson. He's another guy like Von Miller's got who the Broncos have to decide to pick up their option here before the start of this league year. And then Justin Simmons, they've tagged him. They're working toward a long-term deal. I think they'll get a long-term deal done with Justin Simmons before July. Everything I've gathered is positive there with him.
What's your guess on Von Miller? I mean, do you think he's with the team this season? I mean, is it possible? Could they trade him?
They could trade him, but the thing is, if they don't work out
they have to work out the contract
restructure.
First.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So, and I think Vaughn would like to be with the Broncos, but at the same time, I'm sure Vaughn looks at J.J. Watt on the market and what he got and figures, yeah, even though I'm coming off an injury, maybe I could get more than J.J. Watt did. So Vaughn actually holds some cards here on this. He knows that he can go on the market and probably get a big deal from somebody, even in this economically depressed year where teams are going to be watching their cash budget very closely.
Up front, Casey's gone. Matter of fact, Casey, the 2 trades last offseason did not work out. Bayou and Jarrell Casey. Not that, I mean, the Casey one was for a 7th round draft pick, so no big deal. But 2 UFAs on the defensive line that are critical, and that's Walker and Harris.
Right.
How right now is defensive tackle, is nose, is that like the one position on the defensive line that the team needs to upgrade, or are they pretty set with their top 3 guys?
Well, nose tackle is Mike Purcell, and he got hurt last year right after he signed a new contract. So he's going to be back to health. He's going to be on the nose. They really like where Draymond Jones has gone at defensive end, and of course he's their 3rd round pick from 2019. So he's going to be starting. The big question right now is Shelby Harris, whose contract's expiring. Do they bring him back? They are talking with him. The lines of communication are open, but are they going to be able to come to a deal before the start of the new league year or not? If they do, then great. Shelby, a decent pass rusher, but the thing he really does well is he gets his hands up and he knocks down passes at the line of scrimmage. And Bill Kolar, the Broncos D-line coach, in his calculus, views batted passes at the line like sacks,
Right.
and that's one reason why he likes Shelby Harris so much, because he does so well at that. But they were able to plug in some guys because of injuries last year on the defensive line. Deshaun Williams showed some promise there. They have a guy they drafted in the third round last year, McTelvin Agim out of Arkansas, who didn't play all that much. Had some brief flashes, but he's very raw. It's kind of what they banked on when they drafted him last year. So I would guess if they don't bring back Shelby Harris, they'll add a lower cost defensive lineman to kind of be in that rotation.
Okay.
And they'll go in expecting McTelvin Agim to take a step up, and maybe even consider bringing back DeMarcus Walker, who kind of got jerked around early in his career with the Broncos. They tried him an outside linebacker.
Oh, I couldn't even understand what that was about.
Yeah.
I mean, he was such a beast at Florida State. And I understand he was a tweener. I completely get that. But you're right. It just linebacker. I didn't understand that.
Yeah. Didn't understand that. So he sheds weight, and then they say, okay, you're going to go back to the defensive line. So put the weight back on. He's yo-yoing the first couple of years of his career. When he's gotten out there, though, he's been a very efficient pass rusher. And that's the thing. That's the premium skill set, right? Yep. It's the ability to be an interior guy who can win his matchups against the guards and generate some pressure. And he does that at a very high rate. So I look at DeMarcus Walker, and I think that might be a bargain for a team that is looking for a strictly rotational guy who comes in on sub-package downs and can rush the passer. You don't want him against the run. He's not stout at the point of attack against the run, but when he's rushing the passer from the interior, he can do some positive things for you, and has done that for the last couple of years when he's been asked to go in there. So if it were me being George Payton, I'd find a way to bring him back on say a 2-year, $7 million type of deal.
Okay. And Purcell,
3.5 a year.
And Purcell, who had a very good year in 2019, stopping the run. That's what you're supposed to do at that position. You're saying that he is going to be okay, ready to go.
Yeah, he'll be okay, 100%, and he's going to be locked in at no stop.
And then finally at corner. Now, again, Bayou, that didn't work out. But OJ, how do you pronounce his name? Mudia?
OJ Mudia, yes.
Okay. And he did, he struggled, which is going to happen as a rookie, but does he have a good future with the team?
He does. Now, the question is he going to be someone who kind of is a rotational guy, or somebody who ends up being an every down guy? That's what they're waiting to find out. He's a good scheme for what the Broncos want to do. And the thing I liked about OJ Mudia last year is that he got benched, and then when Callahan got hurt, he got forced back into the lineup and did really well.
Okay. And
that was something that Ed Donatel, the defensive coordinator, pointed to. He said, look, we see guys that play and they lose their job as rookies. We see it all the time. What do they do? What do they learn by being on the bench? Thought that OJ Mudia learned as much from being on the bench after playing early in the season as anybody he'd seen. And so that's a good sign. He's a really smart cornerback. I think he's going to be not a cornerback one, but maybe somebody who's a two. Bryce Callahan, when he's healthy, he's terrific, and he showed that he could play outside as well as in the slot last year. But the thing is, Callahan has missed 26 of the last 36 games, including playoffs, that he could have played in. So you have to accept that Bryce Callahan is going to miss some time. He's in the last year of his deal. And then, of course, Asang Bassey, who played some slot last year, he tore his ACL, and he's working his way back. He was a rookie last year out of Wake Forest, undrafted, who really came on. So that's why you see a lot of mock drafts that have the Broncos taking a corner if they stand pat. And certainly the value is there if they stay at 9 to take Caleb Farley or Patrick Surtain II. But at the same time, if you want to have maximum flexibility going into the draft, you might want to look at this free agent class, because there are some scheme fits in free agency that could come to the Broncos at a fraction of what they paid AJ Boye last year.
Well, give me a name, like if Denver goes after a top free agent, offense or defense, and let's get quarterback out of the picture.
Yeah,
throw a name at me, name or two.
If they really want to go big, they'd look at a Patrick Peterson out of Arizona.
Okay.
Who is a lot better in zone than man. They asked him to do some more man concepts the last couple of years, and that's not his forte. Xavier Rhodes is a guy that George Payton was part of drafting in Minnesota.
Interesting.
Bad 2019 with the Vikings. Nice bounce back year with the Colts last year. And certainly Payton's familiarity may kind of help that. If they look for a straight up slot, another guy that Payton drafted, Mackenzie Alexander, who was with the Bengals. Some scheme fits that could be kind of dented cards, but maybe the Broncos feel that they can fix a little bit. Kevin King. Last we saw him, he was getting torched by Scotty Miller in the NFC Championship game, but he's somebody who could fit what the Broncos do. Desmond King, who was great with the Chargers for a minute, then they traded him to Tennessee. Maybe they look at him as somebody they can resuscitate. And then a guy who has a local connection out here, Chidobe Awuzie, went to the University of Colorado, got benched last year by Dallas, but he also had the hamstring problem last year, and he didn't look the same coming back from that. What is he like at full strength? That may be somebody the Broncos look at to fortify that room. I would be shocked if they don't add at least one corner in the first week or two of free agency.
You put O.J. Mudia and Awuzie together, and that will really kill that's any of the guest announcers coming into town. Yeah.
Oh my gosh! Poor Kevin Harlan last year when he was trying to say O.J. Mudia and Okwebunam.
Oh, wow, yes. Oh, come on, stick with Albert O, man. I mean, don't even try it.
Albert actually told the broadcasters with the SEC network when he was in college that it's okay to just call me Albert O. I'm fine with that. I think he got sick of everybody butchering his name so badly. Yeah. So, just stick with Albert O. You can't go wrong, and he's totally cool with it.
Lastly, outside the defensive back, give me a name or a position or two that Broncos, if you had to guess, if they made a splash in free agency or with their first pick.
Well, I'd say beyond cornerback.
Beyond corner and quarterback,
well, if they don't pick up the option on Kareem Jackson, I think they may re-sign Will Parks at safety, but they may look for a safety, say, on day 2. Someone like Richie Grant at Central Florida could be on their radar in the second round if they go for a safety in the draft. I'd take a long look at inside linebacker as well. Now, there are some free agent possibilities, but what if they try to figure out a way to use Micah Parsons? If they trade down, do they look for somebody like Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah and plug him in coverage at linebacker to try to improve that aspect? Those, and if they get into day 2, maybe somebody like Chaz Surratt out of North Carolina, who's got the physical tools and he's got the speed, but certainly he's still, as you can see, he's still learning how to play linebacker because he's a converted quarterback. Now he's talented enough, he's smart enough to be your defensive play caller. It's just bringing it all together, and that's why he's going to slip into day 2. But those are guys that I would kind of keep my eye on, and positions I keep my eye on from the Broncos' perspective. And then if Von Miller departs, then don't be surprised to see them look at an edge rusher. I mean, if they go free agency, maybe they look at a guy like Hassan Reddick out of Arizona, because if the Cardinals don't re-sign him, he could be available, and maybe they look for the edge in the draft as well.
Sounds like it's going to be a lot of defense this offseason for Denver.
Well, they've drafted heavy on offense recently, and they feel like they've got, even though there's questions about Drew Lock's development, in general, the offense appears to be in a much better place than it has been talent-wise. Maybe let that marinate a little bit. But now they've had an older defense. They're having to shed some of those contracts. The balance is probably going to tilt toward the defense in this draft. So I think when all is said and done, most of the Broncos' first few picks will be defense rather than offense. But in terms of the draft, I'd keep my eye on them trying to find a right tackle of the future in the draft. Maybe you get in around 3 or around 4, and then that gives them the freedom to move on from Juwan James after this year.
So right tackle would be the number 1 position on offense.
Yeah,
outside,
I'd say
of course,
so.
Is what they do at quarterback.
Yeah, and then if they let Philip Lindsay go, they could be in the running back conversation as well.
Okay. Andrew, I really appreciate your time, and I also look forward to the opportunity to talk to you again right around the draft. Maybe we'll be able to pick your brain after the draft, before the draft, whatever, depending, of course, especially if there's any blockbuster moves that come down the pike for the Denver Broncos this offseason.
Hey, can't wait. Appreciate it. Thanks.
You got it, Andrew. Thanks a lot. We'll talk to you again sometime in the future. Remind everybody that we'll be back again talking Kansas City Chiefs football probably a week from today right here on the Our Lads Football Network.